Jai Baba, everyone. Hello and welcome to the Sunday late afternoon center program. We are streaming live from the Mayher Center here in Myrtle Beach. And we, as part of our Life and Message of Mayor Baba initiative, have started a series of various virtual programs. And today we will be doing talk number 7 of Jamie Newell's historical presentation of Baba, Meher Baba of Ahmednagar, his life and historical perspective. And today, talk 7 will be all about the new life. Well, as much as we can in an hour.
Not all about. Yeah.
So also, just wanted to mention that we are so appreciative of everyone who makes time to join us on this Zoom. And as many of you may already be aware, we are also doing this for our Mayor Center offerings, which is our weekly newsletter, as well as this will be available on the website and soon on YouTube. So we are appreciative of all of you who are coming here when it's being presented live, and you'll be able to listen to it once again. So today, as I introduced Jamie, I would like to bring him on the screen. Hi, Jamie.
Hi.
Thanks again so much for doing this today. And I'll just hand it over to you. And we expect this to be about an hour, but if we're, give or take, hopefully everyone can stay. And if you have any specific questions, please hold until the end. We may not be able to do a Q&A, but if you do have questions, please feel free to put it in the chat box and direct it towards me. All righty, so I'll hand it over to you, Jamie.
Thank you, Susan. Thank you, everybody, for coming. Thank you, Buzz Connor, for making all this possible. I hope you all can see that. Yeah, I'm just going to dive right in. The new life is at least as mysterious as Mayor Baba's work with the musts, which we talked about last time. So I'm going to try to do sort of a the old Rumi story about the 3 blind men looking at the elephant. They look at different parts and they get a different perspective. So I'm going to suggest different ways to think about Meher Baba and his new life. But with that, try to go through sort of a chronology of what happened and all that. So without further ado, here we go. So in the early morning hours of October 16th, 1949, Meher Baba and 22 companions departed on foot in the rain from the Ahmednagar railway crossing, and thus began perhaps the most remarkable phase of an already remarkable life. Baba called this phase his new life, and it amounted to a combination of what appeared to be both an ascetic exercise of renunciation as well as an opportunity for teaching and training his followers. Now, for the most part, Baba's companions on that day did not know exactly what Mayor Baba's intentions were when they set off from the railroad tracks on these new life travels. As time went on, however, it became evident that he did have a specific goal in mind, and this goal was to achieve God realization, or mononash, the annihilation of the mind. But to do so, not through any occult means or through being a spiritual master, but as a normal human seeker. In other words, going through all the steps that one would do if they made took a vow that they were going to, like the Buddha took a vow that he was going to not move from the Bodhi tree till he got realization. It was that kind of a thing, but doing it all at once. So now, as we've emphasized throughout this series, Meher Baba's entire life up to this point had been motivated by the visionary experience of himself as a God-realized individual. That's the experience that he had when he was 19 years old after he met with the Muslim holy woman, Hazrat Babajan. So the question comes up, why did Meher Baba feel it necessary to achieve, through his own efforts, a state which throughout his life up to that point, he had persistently asserted that he already enjoyed? He already had reached this state, according to his self-report. So why is he going through this again? Well, Meher Baba himself has said that his activities during the new life were the actions of a perfect seeker who ultimately achieves God realization through his own efforts. And along that line, he said, quote, My new life makes me take the stand of a humble servant of God and his people. In my new life, perfect divinity is replaced by perfect humility. In my new life, I am the seeker, the devotee, the brother, and the friend. Both these aspects, perfect divinity and perfect humility, have been by God's will, and both are everlastingly linked with God's eternal life. And if that's not mysterious enough for you, we have more mysterious quotes later. But it would appear that he's, at the very least, we could say he's providing a role model. And we'll talk about some of these things later. I wanted to kind of just present a variety of different ways to think about this. But in general, he didn't spell things out. He didn't spell things out to the people who he was with. And even afterwards, he didn't really spell things out. He would make statements and let them resonate with people and let people make their own decisions about them. In this particular statement, he made for one period of 4 hours, 1 year after they left for the new life in Mahabaleshwar, he had a meeting with people from what he called his old life before the new life started. He had a meeting with them, and this is where he made this statement to try to explain to people just what he was doing, or in a limited way. So now, in the previous talk, those of you who were with us last time, we talked about the perseverance and the urgency with which Meher Baba pursued his work with men and women whom he described as being God intoxicated. But today, we're going to see a similar focus and determination in Meher Baba's pursuit of fulfilling the tenets of what he called his new life. And as I'll talk about later, we kind of talking about these things in these broad philosophical abstract terms, but the new life was probably the least abstract of any of Meher Baba's life periods, because he just was really enthusiastically threw himself into this very difficult project. However we understand it, he and his devotees suffered quite a lot and went through just really extraordinary discipline throughout the entire period. So in both cases, we're talking about the work with the musts and his work on the new life. Baba's determination and his focus were in support of his conviction in the importance of his early visionary experience and his conviction in what he understood to be his universal spiritual work for humanity. And it's important to frame those things, I think, in that sense, because you tend to lose focus of that, particularly if you're just coming to Meher Baba cold. But he asserted repeatedly that all of these things were part of his universal work, spiritual work for humanity. This was his conviction. Now, I've mentioned throughout this series that there are parallels between the different categories of thought in the poetry of Hafiz, and these same categories appear in the life and work of Meher Baba. Now, what I'm not gone into any detail about, and I don't want to belabor, but just is the idea that these categories that I've described about, and I won't go into them again, you can see them if you want to. I've repeated them many times in the other talks. But these categories are really a subcategory of the idea of understanding Meher Baba or any religious phenomena, approaching religious phenomena, spiritual phenomena. I know people who follow Meher Baba don't like the word religion, and frankly, people in religious studies and history of religions don't like the word religion either. There's been debates for years and years about getting rid of the term religion because it's too big of an umbrella term. It doesn't include some religions, usually the definition. And if you make it too broad, it includes everything, communism and all that could be turned into religion. So nobody likes the word religion, but no one's found a better word to replace it. So when we look at religious phenomena, spiritual phenomena, if you prefer, I feel that it's way more useful and accurate to look at religious phenomena or spiritual phenomena from the point of view of the aesthetics of religious symbolism. And so I know you're all saying, well, that's a big help, Jamie. What does that mean? So that's just a big phrase to express the idea that people tend to be drawn to religious practice or to spiritual life, not primarily because of their interest in religion itself or their interest in social life or spiritual practice, but because they are in the pursuit of beauty, of the experience of beauty. And we might say that they are in the pursuit of the experience of spiritual beauty. I'm just going to leave it at that for now, but I think the the point is that when we approach Meher Baba's new life, when we try to understand his new life, try to make sense of his motivations, what the function of the new life was in his life and work, all of this I feel is better understood or better experienced when we look at Meher Baba's life and work in the same way that we might look at a work of art, rather than try to pick it apart and be very intellectual about it, trying to grasp its meaning intellectually. We'll benefit more from approaching the new life. And even though I could have said this also about the work with the musts and a lot of the different phases of his work, if we look at them as we might approach a great work of art. And again, I'm just going to leave that with you to kind of see how that resonates with you, and just as another way to kind of shift the focus of how we look at and understand his new life, because it's really there are many ways to understand it, and I think 10 people could come up with a very precise description, and each one would be different, and no one would be necessarily wrong, just a different perspective. Now, for his part, Meher Baba himself, when asked by his New Life companions how to explain the new life to others, Meher Baba said, just tell them that, quote, hopelessness means renunciation of all hopes. Aimlessness means renunciation of all aims. Helplessness means renunciation of all help. No master, no disciple means renunciation of all spirituality. And the new life I have in mind eventually means absolute renunciation. Therefore, if anyone asks you what this new life is, say absolute and perfect renunciation. If they ask renunciation of what, say of everything: aims, hopes, help, and life itself. Close quote. So again, these are all just different ways to think about it, look at it, and just I think the new life, we're just better to kind of absorb it the way you would absorb a beautiful painting. So, but here's what we're going to focus on today for the rest of this session. First, we'll begin with some important developments in Meher Baba's life and work during this period that do not directly involve the new life, but I don't want to just skirt over them. Next, we'll take a brief look at the world situation prior to and during the new life. And after this, we'll take a quick chronological survey of some of the important movements and activities of Meher Baba and his companions during the new life. And this will, of course, be just an overview, but I hope it's going to show us something of the life experience of those accompanying Meher Baba during his new life activities. And I'm not going to get into, there's so many documents that Baba produced, so many injunctions, the sort of the conditions of the new life was a long thing. I could take a couple sessions just reading through the conditions of the new life. So I'm going to direct you to different sources if you're really interested in those things. And there's lots of wonderful stories, but we're not going to be able to go into all that. But we are going to jump then to what is very important. This is the final phase of the new life, which Meher Baba called the Mononash phase. So in order to gain some insight into how Meher Baba understood the whole new life in general, and specifically the Mononash phase of the new life, we'll take some direct quotes from Baba about this period, about the Mononash itself, what the Mononash means. And depending on how we're doing with time, there may be a lot of that. I may edit some of that down. We may go over a little bit. We'll just see how we progress. So then we'll conclude with some reflections on how the new life may have functioned as an element of Meher Baba's life and work. And when we look at religious phenomena from the perspective of religious studies or history of religions, we want to know what was the function. We know people did this. Why did they do this or that? What was the function of it in their lives or in the work or in their social lives, that kind of thing. Now, as I've said, this is only going to be a brief survey. If you do want to learn more about this period, there are some wonderful books. When I first found out about Meher Baba, this book, Tales from the New Life, was the only book about the new life. There's a section in C.B. Purdam's book, The God Man, and those were really the only two sources we had for the new life. But now we have this wonderful book by Bao, compiled by Bao, called Meher Baba's New Life. Bal Natu's book, Glimpses of the God Man, Volume 2, has a lot about it. As I say, this transcription of talks between Don Stevens and the people who were in the new life itself, Goher and Meru and Mani and Erich. And then, of course, there's Balkachuri's 20-volume biography. Lord Mayhare has a very large section on the New Life. So I encourage you to look at those. They're wonderful, wonderful resources that we had now that years ago, we didn't have it all. So before getting into the details of Meher Baba's New Life activities, I do want to touch on two important events that occurred during the 1940s. We didn't cover them last time, but they're essential events in Meher Baba's life that we don't want to skip over. First, of course, important to us here is the development of the Meher Spiritual Center itself. The second is Meher Baba's first contacts with Rabia Martin and Ivy Deuce, and these are contacts which led to the reorientation of an offshoot of Inayat Khan's Sufi order and to the development of a Sufi order which Meher Baba named Sufism Reoriented. Now, while they were in India in May of 1941, Meher Baba gave instructions to Elizabeth Patterson and Norina Machabelli to find property for establishing a center in America. And on June 4th of 1944, Elizabeth wrote a long letter to Baba describing a tract of land in Myrtle Beach, South Carolina. The land had been given to her by her father for the purpose of establishing a spiritual center for Meher Baba. And in this letter, she basically is saying, Baba, please accept this gift. We've worked hard to find this thing, and it's amazing because she did all this work, very, very expensive parcel of land, and she's kind of like begging Baba to accept it. You would think, with most people that would be assumed that they would accept it, but she was very, very hopeful that she had done everything right and that Baba would like what she had done. And of course, he did like it and he did accept it. In the letter, it mentions that it was deeded to her on May 15th, 1944. And so that's how we have the Meher Center now. Now, there's a lot more to say about that. I'm not going into too much detail because my late wife and I did a film. It's about an hour and a half long called The Meher Spiritual Center Origins and Development. And you'll find this film on the Meher Spiritual Center website. It's at this link, but just look under the digital offerings and do a little search there and you'll find it. There's also another one that we did, which is on the connection between Baba's Mononash phase and the Meher Center. And both of them are very relevant, but because we go into so much detail there, if you have interest, please look up those two films. The second one is called The Meher Center and Meher Baba's New Life. So the second important development, though, that I want to mention is Meher Baba's interest in Rabia Martin's Sufi order and his creation of Sufism Reoriented through the work he did on the charter document for Sufism. Now, in the early 1920s, the Sufi master Hazrat Inayat Khan founded a Sufi order in the West based upon his own Chishti Sufi teachings. Chishti order Sufi teachings. There's a large Sufi Chishti order based on the teachings of Moinuddin Chishti, and there's a lineage of that, and he was in that lineage. But he took out some of the Islamic aspects. He made it a little more user-friendly for people in the West. And from that order, after his death, an American disciple in that order named Rabia Martin took on the mantle of the Murshida, or leader of the Inayat Khan Sufi order in the United States. And subsequently, through Norina Machabelli and Elizabeth Patterson, Rabia Martin learned of Meher Baba. They had given a talk. Norina gave a talk in San Francisco, and she saw this talk and became interested. And after a period of soul searching and study, she decided to dedicate both herself and her Sufi order to Meher Baba. Now, before her death in 1947, Rabia Martin, she had come to the center. She actually was involved in some of the early visits to the center here. And she appointed one of her murids, that's one of her disciples, Mrs. Ivy Deuce, as her successor. And she encouraged Mrs. Deuce to contact Meher Baba and to ask for his help in directing the future of the Sufi order. And in January 1948, Mrs. Deuce traveled to India with her daughter Charmian, and they met Meher Baba and his Mandali for the first time. That's a picture of them there at Merazad. And this, of course, led to lots of contact and the development of the Sufi charter. And under Meher Baba's direction, Mrs. Deuce founded Sufism Reoriented, which was a new Sufi order, or reoriented to be entirely dedicated to Meher Baba and his teachings. And we'll say a little bit more about that in the last talk in this series, because it's just about the activities of people who follow Meher Baba after he had dropped the body. So Now, those are just two important things that happened that I wanted to make sure we didn't skip over. But now to just talk about the context of what was going on in the world. During this time, the entire world was still adapting to new ways of life. In the aftermath of World War II, the United States and the Soviet Union, who had been allies during World War II, were now entering into a competition for political and economic and military dominance on the world stage. After the cataclysmic destruction of Hiroshima and Nagasaki in Japan at the end of World War II, the threat of nuclear warfare now between these two superpowers became an ongoing concern and is still something that weighs heavily on people as they watch the tensions and the wars springing up all over the place. Now, during this same period of time, millions of homeless people were scattered across Europe and the world, and many national economies had been just put into ruins due to the massive destruction caused by World War II. Part of this whole system of change was India. We talked about the partition of India in the last talk, and India by now had been divided into two different countries, which eventually became three countries due to Muslim majorities in both far western and far eastern corners of the nation. Those areas had become West Pakistan and East Pakistan, respectively. And eventually, although there were many disputes and iterations and adjustments of the borders, eventually East Pakistan became Bangladesh, West Pakistan became Pakistan, and the remaining, of course, body of geographical area was India. So this was all going on just as the new life was beginning. In 1948, Mahatma Gandhi had been assassinated by radical Hindu nationalists. They felt that he had given too much to the Muslims. He was trying to get everybody to play nice together. He had given a lot of concessions to the Muslims, and this made the Hindu nationalists very angry. And so he was assassinated, and also, as a part of this whole conflagration, India and Pakistan continued to war against each other over boundaries, especially in the region of Kashmir. And all of these issues, Hindu nationalism, battling with Pakistan, all that is continuing on even today. So it's significant that it was starting then, I think, while Meher Baba was going on the new life. So it's at this historical moment, and with little explanation, that Meher Baba decided to give up all of his worldly belongings and depart on a life of walking, begging, and renunciation. Now, in terms of possessions, he retained only a few personal items for traveling, and he retained two properties. There's been some discussion that maybe they're Biramangala, some other things, but for sure we know that he retained two properties in his names. The structure on Mehrabad Hill, which he intended to one day be his tomb shrine, and the property here in Myrtle Beach, which was already in development as the Meher Spiritual Center. I believe Meherji took possession of Mehrabad, except for the tomb, and Nariman took possession of Meherzad, and Baba divested himself of everything that he had. So it was in mid-1949 that Meher Baba announced to the world, to all his disciples around the world, that he planned to completely divest himself of all of his worldly belongings and to depart with a small group of disciples to live a life of wandering and begging and renunciation, to never return, and nor to ever even contact those who remained behind. The abrupt news of this unprecedented plan came as a shock to his devotees around the world. Meetings were held at Lower Mehrabad to determine who would be allowed to accompany Meher Baba on this new life and who would not. And many of the details of all these different arrangements were decided upon and ironed out at these meetings at Lower Mehrabad. Now, up to this point, Baba had been supporting and taking care of the needs of many of his disciples, particularly around India. People would come and say, Baba, I just want to dedicate myself to you, and they'd give all their belongings and everything to Baba, and then they would be under his orders. And also, he would give them little stipends, and he would support their families. And there were many, many people, and there were so many people that he had just an intimate. We talked about the development of affectional bonds. Well, he had intense affectional bonds with huge networks of people. Those of us here in Myrtle Beach recently have had the pleasure of having our friend Vinod Kilnani, who his family, he grew up in the Cushman quarters. And that was just one family, but they'd constantly, any problem came up, they'd send Bob a cable, send him a letter, and he would write back. Even if he was in seclusion, certain people, he'd say, okay, and family problems, everything. All this was going on all the time. But he had to make arrangements now that he was going to break all of that off. He was not going to be providing for people, but he had to provide take care of make some arrangements for those people who were going to stay behind and who had been dedicated everything to him. So documents were signed indicating each one's commitment and Bob's expectations of how they would conduct their affairs. Again, Meherji and Narshwin had a lot to do with, I forget the title he gave them, arrangement Wallace, something like that, and they would take care of all these different things. Baba talked with everybody individually and worked things out, and then the middle person would be often Nariman and Meherji. So whether they went with him or they remained apart from him, everything was done in detail. Now, ultimately, Meher Baba's new life period ran roughly from August 1949 to February 1952. Now, he says in many of his statements, this new life is eternal, it will go on forever. But in terms of his living it as a begging mendicant out in the world, that period ended in February of 1952, at least in that specific way. So, as we've already mentioned, Baba departed on October 16th, 1949, from the Ahmednagar railway crossing with 22 companions, and this began what Baba called the training phase of the new life, which lasted approximately 4 months. So he was all ready to go. There's an interesting dynamic about the new life is that Baba was ready to go, but it was, and he separated and kind of made these boundaries between him and some of the people he was close to. But many of the people, particularly these 22 people, he said, okay, no, you can come with me, but you have to, even though there's no master to a disciple, you have to do what I say. And you have to, basically, he didn't always say this explicitly, but he was basically saying, I need to do this work that I'm doing, this Manonash work, ultimately building up to becoming God realized as a normal person. And you can come along, but you have to help me with that. But as the time went on, that became a drag on his main goal. His connection, his affection for, and his compassion for these people who were with him slowed down his process. And we'll see more of that as we go on. But this was the training phase to kind of prepare them. He was all ready to go, but he wanted to prepare the other people for being out on the new life. So this began in earnest in Belgaum. That's where the Song of the New Life was composed, and Baba began going through various rigors and enforcing certain rules. Some were less strict now, but he was preparing them for when the requirements would be tightened more and more as the time went on. So the next day they traveled to Benares, and not the next day, the next after the period. What was it, from October 20th to November 12th? So it means on the 12th. They began their travel to Benares, which is in the north of India. Belgaum is in the south. And from that period till November 31st, began the beginning of what Baba called the begging and the Langoti phase. Langoti is like a dhoti. It's like just having a piece of cloth wrapped around you as your only clothing. Gandhi wore a dhoti, not a Langoti, but a dhoti, but it's a similar kind of idea of just having a piece of cloth to live on. He called it the Langoti phase. And this was still part of the training phase of the new life, but introducing the companions into the begging life was going to be. Now, this period was followed from December 1st to December 12th by 12 days in Sarnath. And Sarnath is a holy site connected with the life of the Buddha. Now, these 12 days spent on the site connected with the Buddha, where Baba did he did some prayer things and some other sort of austerities, you could say. It seems to me to be significant because this was really immediately followed by a period which was very much like the life of the Buddha. If you read the life of the Buddha, they would walk and beg, and all they had for possession was their begging bowl. And during the rainy season, they would camp in an area, and later on we'll see Baba goes to Satara during the rainy season. So he was following very much the kind of life that the Buddha and his disciples led so long ago. As with the Buddha and his traveling companions, Baba and his new life companions journeyed on foot. They were begging for their food along the way. They were sleeping out in the open. And they did this. Remember, this is still just training. And they walked during this period almost 700 miles north, which is much colder weather than they were used to Dehradun, and then finally to the village of Manjari, Mafi. And this took them from December 12th to January 12th. So they're still, the training phase was 4 months. So we've got October to November, November to December. So they're still only like 3 months in. Now, I say that the new life was like the life of the Buddha, but it was also very much like the life of a dervish. And we've made a lot of comments about the connection between Hafiz and the Persian Sufi lifestyle. The word dervish is a word derived from the Persian, and it means a mendicant or one who travels from door to door seeking alms. And this is the kind of life that they had. In his early life as a wandering seeker, Meher Baba's father, Shariarji, was often referred to as a dervish. The dervish and the dervish lifestyle are often referred to in the poetry of Hafiz, and Persian Sufis themselves are often referred to as dervishes. And so this lifestyle was very much in keeping with the dervish lifestyle, which just kind of brings us back into the some of those categories that I talked about earlier about Hafiz in his poetry. Now, this destination town of Mandri Mafi, many of you may know Amrit Irani, her father Kumar, had not yet met Baba, but he had prepared some small dwellings for Baba and the companions. And this was, they arrived there and stayed there from January 12th until June 14th. So this was a long extended period, although they kind of used that as a base, and then they would go out doing different pieces of work that Baba wanted to do. So as they began to be settled into Mandri Mafi, having done this really excruciating walk of 700 miles, and only 3 months into the training phase, Baba presented a new set of plans which would allow the companions to follow a variety of different paths throughout what Baba called the labor phase of the new life. They were now moving into a new phase. It was going to be the labor phase. But it had become evident as the new life progressed that Baba's companions and his compassion for them was actually slowing down this work that he wanted to do. Matter of fact, when we look at this book by Bao, the Meher Baba's New Life book, there's a huge amount of, there were a lot of diaries were kept, and so we have a lot of information about that. But after this period, after about a year, actually, after the Mahabaleshwar period, everybody was winnowed away into different labor things, to different jobs, different ways to live the new life, but not necessarily with Baba. And we have very, very little documentation of that period, because this was when Baba was going at it in earnest, and there weren't people just sitting around writing diaries and things. Now, as rigorous as the new life was, Baba wanted to pursue it even more intensely than he had been up to this 3 or 4 month period. But he was always mindful of the limitations of the people who he'd brought with him. And so he made allowances for them. And that, he said, hindered his own progress. So these new plans eventually provided an off-ramp for companions to remain in the new life without slowing Baba down in his own progress. And referring to these new plans, Baba said, quote, "These plans make me free to live the new life in my own way and yet keep you all 100% in the new life." So he's not only kind of trying to move forward with his plan, but he's very cognizant and compassionate and kind to these people who are with him who can't really keep up. So Baba was still staying at Mandri Mafi when he traveled to the Kumbh Mela in Hardwar. Now it's reported, and this is one of the more amazing facts of the new life. So this is after he'd walked these 700 miles. He walked daily something like 12 miles to the Kumbh Mela, and during the month of March and April 1950. And during that period, he contacted and bowed down to 10,000 sadhus, seekers, saints, and other holy pilgrims who were attending the Kumbh Mela. I mean, this is just, when you read the account, it's very moving and very sort of baffling and astonishing, and just how he was able to do that, and that he was so intensely motivated to go, bowing down and contacting, and just in a relatively short period of time. And those disciples who were able to keep up with him were themselves exhausted. And additionally, this period of stay in the north of India was a time of extreme suffering and difficulty for Meher Baba and all of his companions. Again, the Kumbh Mela work of bowing down to over 10,000 souls caused him extreme neck and back pain. And this condition continued throughout the remainder of his life. And Goher often pointed to this period as the start of his neck and back problems. He contracted during this period a painful eye infection, and at one point even came down with a severe case of the mumps while he's driving himself to do all this different work. Not being used to the extremely cold climate, several of the companions during this period suffered a variety of illnesses, which they all had difficulty recovering from. Baba's sister Mani even contracted a severe case of food poisoning. And despite his own ill health and all the work he was doing, Baba took great pains to nurse Mani back to health and to see to her and spend time with her. So this is some of the things that slowed him down, just caring for the health and the well-being of other people while he was driving himself to these things. So as I said, on June 14th, when the monsoon season started, Baba transferred the party to Sasara in South India, where they stayed throughout the monsoon period, shifting to Mahabaleshwar on October 1st, 1950. And again, this is parallel to the way the Buddha would travel on foot throughout the normal period of the year, and then during what he called the rainy season, they would set up a camp somewhere. Now, as I said, we quoted earlier in Mahabaleshwar on October 16th, 1 year into the new life, Baba stepped back into the old life for 4 hours, and he met with a large group of male disciples. And these are photographs from this period. And after this meeting, on October 21st, 1950, Baba left for a 6-week tour of India, contacting sadhus and saints and working with musts and the poor throughout India, traveling to Nepal and Calcutta, among other places. And remember, 1950, traveling in India, this kind of a tour is very, very exhausting and excruciatingly difficult. And according to Meher Baba, this period, he was not doing the same kind of work that he did that we saw in the previous presentation. He was not doing must work where he used them to, his explanation for those things was that he was using the must as a way to work with other people in the world. But this, he said, was strictly a completely different kind of work where he was just paying respect to these men and women of God that he encountered in different places. And this apparently was a part of his process of moving towards what he called the Mononash. Now, from November 25th, excuse me, from November 25th to December 6th of 1950, Baba worked with Mus and the poor in Bombay. So he did a tour of more in the northern India and the far eastern India, Calcutta and up in Nepal. Then he moved down to Bombay. And from late December to January, he worked with Musts in Hyderabad. And in late January 1950, he resumed his must work in Bombay. Again, I want to reiterate, this is not the same as, according to his explanations, this was not the same as the must work that he did prior to the new life. He did this strictly as someone who was paying respect to, he would say, men and women of God. So now, just as he had gone into a great seclusion, which I didn't go into a lot of detail on, we talk about that more in these in the New Life film that I was telling you about. But he had a great seclusion period that he went into prior to the New Life, and just as he did that, likewise preparatory to beginning his Mononash work, Baba began a 100-day seclusion that lasted from February 13th, 1951 to May 24th, 1951. And the evening before his seclusion began, he offered a prayer asking God for God's help in achieving his upcoming work. And these kind of, throughout the early part, particularly of the New Life and later on, at first it was completely baffling to the people at the first New Life meeting when Baba would ask God for help. And they had all spent many, many years accepting God, Meher Baba, as being God in human form, being a realized master. And now he was asking God for help, and this was baffling to people. But this is something he did, again, as preparation for this seclusion, which itself was a preparation, according to him, for the Mononash work that he was later to do. So after this seclusion, there was a large gathering of the old and new companions. This was from June 20th to June 30th, 1951. And this was a sort of a launching off of the Mononash phase. And this Mononash phase began, according to Baba, on June 30th, the beginning part, from June 30th to November 7th, 1951. And the final days of the Mononash phase continued for 4 months, from November 8th, 1951 to February 12th, 1952. And as I've said, so many fascinating stories and details about those, which, as it is, I'm kind of racing through. We went through the whole New Life in a short time. But Suffice to say that exactly 2 years after living this new life, he entered into what he described as the Mononash phase. This was on the 16th of 1951, 16th of October 1951. This is the annihilation of the mind period of the new life. And this period lasted from October 16th, 1951 to February 1952. And at the end of this period, Meher Baba issued the first of what he came to call the life circulars. And we're going to talk more about the life phases in the next presentation, because it's as it is now, we still got a lot to say about the new life. But as the Mononash came to the end, he issued a life circular, and this is I'm going to quote some of the things he had to say in that. This is excerpts where he announced essentially the successful completion of this Mononash work. He said, quote, "The one all-pervading, all-comprehending, all-powerful God, who is the self of ourselves, and besides whom nothing is real, has helped me and guided me during the Mononash period of my work, and now makes me dictate to you the following. To try to understand with the mind that which the mind can never understand is futile, and to try to express by sounds of language and in forms of words the transcendental state of the soul is even more futile. All that can be said and has been said and will be said by those who live and experience that state is that when the false self is lost, the real self is found, that the birth of the real can only follow the death of the false, and that dying to ourselves, the true death which ends all dying, is the only way to perpetual life. This means that when the mind with its satellites, desires, cravings, longings, is completely consumed by the fire of divine love, then the infinite, indestructible, indivisible, eternal self is manifested. This is Mononash, the annihilation of the false, limited, miserable, ignorant, destructible I, to be replaced by the real I, the eternal possessor of infinite knowledge, love, power, peace, bliss, and glory in its unchangeable existence. Unless and until ignorance is removed and knowledge is gained, the knowledge whereby the divine life is experienced and lived, everything pertaining to the spiritual seems paradoxical. God, whom we do not see, we say is real, and the world that we do see, we say is false. In experience, what exists for us does not really exist, and what does not exist for us really exists. We must lose ourselves in order to find ourselves, thus loss itself is gain. We must die to self to live in God, thus death means life. We must become completely void inside to be completely possessed by God. Thus, complete emptiness means absolute fullness. We must become naked of selfhood by possessing nothing, so as to be absorbed in the infinity of God. Thus, nothing means everything. For these last 4 months, according to ordinary human standards and by ways and means known to me, I have tried my utmost for the achievement of Mononash. And I can say in all truth that I feel satisfied with the work done. This satisfaction is due to the feeling I have of having regained my old life, Meher Baba state, yet retaining my new life, ordinary state. I have regained the knowledge, strength, and greatness that I had in the old life, and retained the ignorance, weaknesses, and humility of the new life. This union of the old and new life states has given birth to life that is eternally old and new, close quote. And he goes into, in some detail, when we get into the life phases, which I won't go into at the moment, they're almost like a sort of a philosophical expression of this integration that he describes of being weak and humble, and at the same time great and all-knowing as one who is realized. But we won't say much more about that. So, as I mentioned earlier, looking at Meher Baba's new life symbolically can be helpful for some. I think, for one thing, it allows each person to connect to Meher Baba's new life activities and to understand them in their own way. By the way, this photo here is the four individuals, the only four who made it back with Meher Baba, went through the entire New Life with him. It's Gustaji on Baba's right. Right behind Baba is Bidal. Then Baba's cousin, just to his left, is Pendu Irani. And then, of course, Eris Jesawala. They're the ones who made it all the way through. So Meher Baba's own stated objective in the New Life was to achieve Mononash, to replace the false ego with, quote, the real I, the eternal possessor of infinite knowledge, love, power, peace, bliss, and glory in its unchangeable existence. However, when we look at the practical function of the New Life in the context of Meher Baba's life and work, we can observe several things objectively. And this is just, again, trying to reflect in another way, kind of get another angle, like the blind men looking at the elephant, of just ways to think about what went on. And again, the activities and the rigor and the zeal with which Meher Baba pursued everything in this New Life, it's well worth digging into some of the sources that I described before to get more detail on that instead of just going over the surface like I'm doing. But one way we can look at the function of the New Life is seeing it as a method of training and teaching his disciples, both present, the ones who were with him, the ones who were with him in the sense of being in India, being contemporaries of him, but not being present with him as he went through all these ordeals. But also for us now and for people in the future when they read about his life. It would seem that a consequence of Meher Baba's activities in the New Life was that it provides an example for anyone who wishes to live a life of integrity, purity, and humility. And I mean, I haven't gone into a lot of detail about it, but you see over and over and over again in their stories of how it was obviously and clearly with integrity, Meher Baba was pursuing a life of purity and humility, and he did this in numerous different ways. There are tons and tons of touching stories. But from this perspective of living this kind of life, Baba has said, quote, my new life makes me take the stand of a humble servant of God and his people. In my new life, perfect divinity is replaced by perfect humility. In my new life, I am the seeker, the devotee, the brother, and the friend. And again, we see in the stories examples that are quite impressive. So another thing, the New Life can be understood, and this is something that people don't often think about. This is something that was heard Adi K. Irani say in a talk that he gave at the Meher Spiritual Center many, many years ago, that the New Life was sort of an anticipation of Meher Baba's death. As I said, many, many people had become dependent upon Baba for everything. And one function of the New Life could easily be seen as a way to begin to get people used to the idea that he would not be always around physically. It was like a death in many ways. He said, boom, I'm gone. You're not going to see me again. That's my old life, and you're just going to have to get on without me. And quite compassionately, he actually did come back. He prepared people for the idea that he wasn't going to be around, and they got that sort of shock, and they sort of began to adjust themselves to it. And then, oops, a couple of years later, he was back. He maintained more and more distance, and he kind of separated himself more and more. But this was sort of the beginning of a withdrawal from, not completely, but for a lot of people, it was less and less and a little bit more distant, with each passing year. And we'll talk about that more, particularly in the next one, and then I think the 9th talk. We talk a lot about that because that's that last decade he was withdrawing from everyone. So Baba divested himself not only of all worldly goods and material wealth, but also of the responsibility to micromanage the daily lives of so many of his followers. It's also true that soon after the New Life, his 2 automobile accidents greatly increased his suffering and decreased his lifespan, and made it necessary that he not be doing as much as he had been doing previously. And it's interesting that he said that he maintained this sort of weakness and this sort of less sort of omniscience, as he describes his old life state. And in that state of weakness, he suddenly began having really serious automobile accidents. So another way to think about the New Life is that the New Life is really a metaphor for death and rebirth, not simply Meher Baba's separating from people, but just as a way of thinking about. And when we look at his life and the way he approached the new life, it was like going on to another incarnation. And there's just some quotes to illustrate this, both from Baba and from some of the people who were with him. He says, quote, this is Baba, he says, quote, those who come with me should consider themselves already dead, just as a corpse has no material connections or concern with anyone or anything, and asks no questions and needs no provisions. Even so, those accompanying me will have to be with me as corpses. I am going to see who is out to die for no particular reason by going with me. Close quote. So that's not the, when someone asks you to come on a party with them, it's not what you want to hear. I'm going to see who is out to die for no particular reason by going with me, close quote. And this is a quote from Bao. He says, quote, Baba reiterated that those accompanying him should consider themselves dead to everything, like corpses which remain unaffected by the world and its affairs, neither questioning nor wanting anything, close quote. And then, quote, we have left the old life behind us, and now there is no going back. It is practically dead. Our old life has been dead since October 16th, 1949, close quote. This is a quote from Baba. The first one was from Bao, describing the new life, and this one is a quote from Baba. Now, this is Alaba describing his experience of the new life. Quote, if in the new life you were willing to become a dead man, the life was easy. But if there was anything in this world you held on to, the new life was a tremendous suffering, close quote. And that's from Bao's book, Meher Baba's New Life. And this is Erich describing his experience of the new life to Don Stevens in his book, Tales of the New Life. He says, quote, Baba gave us to understand that once we set out on the new life, it would never end, and that we had to turn our backs on our relatives, wives, children, homes, and all. And Don asks him, for the rest of your lives? Erich says, for the rest of our lives. He told us we wouldn't even have the opportunity again to see our old life companions, the old life Mondali, our relatives, friends, and Baba lovers. We were to completely turn our backs on the world, seeking a life of helplessness and hopelessness in the companionship of Baba himself, close quote. So having no contact with those in the old life might be understood as being quite similar to the experience of one who passes away and is reincarnated in a new body with no connection with their old life. And this was, again, as we saw, the experience of the people who were on the new life. So we've now looked at the new life. We talked about the new life from a variety of different perspectives, looked at it aesthetically, symbolically, in terms of different ways that we might understand Meher Baba's new life activities, functioning in his life and work. But as I say, these are really sort of abstract and philosophical ways of thinking about looking at Meher Baba's new life activities. For Meher Baba himself and for the companions, the new life was not an abstract philosophical exercise at all. It was an excruciating application of spiritual principles day after day, walking. They had terrible, particularly the first weeks, they had terrible blisters on their feet. They had sore legs. They were not eating very much. Sometimes they would beg for food and not get anything. Sometimes they'd get a pail of stuff, and Baba would just mix it all in. And you just said, you're so starving, you didn't care. You just ate what was ever in the bowl, but it could be anything thrown in there. They just took whatever was available. The new life was extremely challenging, both physically, mentally, and emotionally for Meher Baba and his companions. And some of this can be inferred from our survey of his movements and activities during the period. Just a list of one kind of really, really arduous experience after another. But perhaps one of the most impressive features to me of the new life is the way in which the affectional bonds that we've described in other talks that Meher Baba had forged with his disciples withstood the extreme hardships of the new life and actually propelled the companions forward in the new life, both for those who were with him and for those who were away from him. It was this affection for him and this desire to please him that kept them going. One thing that all of the companions of the new life were in agreement on was that the hardships and the difficulties of the new life were completely relativized by Meher Baba's company and companionship. When you look at it, particularly in Don Stevens's book and other places, you'll see they say that the hardest difficulty was just the thought and the fear that they might do something that would cause Baba to send them away. I mean, he had to be cheerful all the time. It wasn't just he went through hardships, but he had to be cheerful through all this. And they're all terrified that if they weren't, Baba would, in a moment, it was hard enough for him. As we saw, he had to kind of winnow people away so that he could really apply himself to the arduous rigors that he wanted to pursue. And they were holding him back. And they were all afraid that he would send them away. All they wanted was to be with him. And the thought of being sent away inspired them to face all of these hardships and duties with as much zeal and enthusiasm as they could possibly muster. And when you hear many, many audio tape talks and video talks where you hear Erich and Mani and others talking about it, where you really get that feeling that that's all they cared about. However hard this all sounds when we describe it, none of it mattered as long as they could be with Baba. And there are countless very, very touching stories that emerge from the new life. We've not had a chance to cover those. I encourage you to look at the sources and dig out some of those stories and just enjoy kind of from an easy chair. We can look at the new life and try to understand it. But I find it a lot of these stories and a lot of the whole vast panoply, the spectrum of Meher Baba's work and the way he applied himself to all this and the compassion he showed for his companions, it's all really quite moving. Now, up until February 10th, 1954, the general public knew Meher Baba as Sri Sadguru Meher Baba. But after this date, Baba publicly announced that his spiritual status was that of avatar of the age. He'd shared this with intimates. Even Gene Adriel in the 30s wrote a book called Avatar. He spoke openly and broadly about Avatar, particularly with it's a wonderful story in the 30s where Baba was explaining his role as Avatar to Anita Viard. And Anita was just confused. And she said, Baba, I don't care if you're the Avatar. I love you anyway. And Baba really liked that she loved him even if he was the Avatar. But at this period, he was not just saying it privately, he was saying it publicly. Adi Kairani would say in his talks that when someone would, after that date, if someone sent a letter to Sri Sadguru Meher Baba, he would send it back to them saying, kindly address it to Avatar Meher Baba or we won't open the letter. So he would, from that period, Baba was the Avatar. And this is the period that we're going to discuss. The period of Baba's life, we'll discuss that in the life phases and Meher Baba's accidents and the role of all this and how that all played out as best we can in a short 1 hour period. We'll do that in our 8th installment next time, which I believe is October 20th next month. So thank you, everybody.
Jamie, that was wonderful. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Can you not share the screen anymore?
Oh, yeah, sorry. You don't really want to see me, do you?
Of course we do. Jamie, thanks so much again. To put Bob's new life into a 1 hour presentation is no small feat in and of itself. There are so many aspects of that time period. And I'm just curious, while you were preparing this, did you feel that there was something that you really wanted to expand upon?
Well, I wanted to include, see, the most moving things are the stories, particularly the stories in the that Erich tells of that second half that isn't really documented very well in the Bau's book because there aren't any diaries from that period. And the stories are just so moving. It's just really amazing. And the other things, again, I'm preparing all this in the sense of a sort of a historical study of a spiritual master, and to take too theological a slant just kind of spoils that presentation. But there's really bizarre, miraculous things occurred. There's this Todi Singh who showed up with with several carts full of food. Said Bob had come to him in a dream, and he insisted. He said he know that Keki Nelaval, I think Narshwan's father, was saying, no, go away. There's no such person here. It's like the Wizard of Oz saying, no, don't look behind the curtain. And but he insisted and insisted and insisted, and finally Baba said, "Yeah, it's all right. Let him come, and we'll take his food, and we'll." But and then Baba said, again, instead of saying, "Oh, thanks," Baba says, "Well, what am I going to do with this? Who's going to cook it?" And he says, "Oh, my wife and I will come, and we'll cook it all for you. Don't worry." So then he ends up staying for a month or something, and then Baba finally, kind of coddles him and gently sends him away. But yeah, so there's stories like that. There's so many touching, beautiful, and miraculous stories that went on that they would that alone would kind of take up the whole thing. And I have a feeling now. I know many of you, if you're in the Myrtle Beach area, and even if you're not, Ward Parks has been traveling around the world. Really, he was in Australia, and I don't know where he is now, but he's coming to Myrtle Beach next month, I think, and he's doing a whole series on the New Life. And I'm doubtless he will cover much more than I have, and he will get into some of those stories, which are so beautiful. So yeah, there's lots of stuff that I did not was not able to get to, but that human side is really the real stuff of the New Life, but you have to be able to corral it in with these facts.
Definitely. And the other thing that I was just personally curious, because as a historian, I'm always looking for more information about Baba, especially things that we may not easily have access to. And you just mentioned that, of course, Baba, there were no diaries that we are aware of during that time,
That second point,
unlike
yeah,
other times with Chanji and Nadi and so
yeah.
on. So, uh, how do you think for someone who's just kind of coming to this and approaching, wanting to know about the New Life, what would you suggest would be resources for people? I know you mentioned Erich and a lot of the things that he had said in Mondley Hall. What are some other things that you would recommend for people to look into?
Well, the simplest one, like I said, the first thing that was out there, just conversations with Don Stevens in that book, Tales of the New Life. It's very accessible, and it's just particularly for those of us who had the pleasure of being in Mondeley Hall with the Mondeley. It's just it really evokes that atmosphere of just sitting around asking questions and them answering. So there's that. I mean, for me personally, I've read Bau's New Life book 3 times, and and I find it very emotionally moving. Just it's so just amazing. But there's a whole. I mean, that's a big thick book. It's lots of stuff in there, and it goes on and on and on, and it's got exhaustive accounts of as I said, the directives which go on. Lots and lots of documents. Baba, even as early as Manzali Meme, he would have people sign documents, and he'd say, "I'm going to stay with you this long, and I'm going to do this and that." So there's tons of that related to the New Life. There are tons of qualifications. Can you do this? Can you do that? If you can't do that, you're not going to be able to come. You can be with me, but not travel with me. There was all these different levels and then it became even more complicated at this halfway point when he started to winnow people away and say, okay, you can do this. You can, he had Donkin ended up being having a little office across the street from Narshwin's house, and did absolutely no business whatsoever. But this was how Baba said he could be in the New Life, and it ended up being good because he was available when Baba would come back to that area. And so there's all these kind of things that are complicated that it all of it is documented pretty well in Bao's book. Plus, there's a lovely section in the back where Bao has his own sort of interpretation of things, and so that's a great place if you're really into digging in. If you want just the little snippets, then Don Stevens' book Tales of the New Life, and that one Bao's book is not available in digital form yet, but that Tales of the New Life is available on the Trust online library if you like to read digital books. And lovely, if you've ever read any of the Glimpses books, Bal Natu's books, he has a lovely writing style and sort of his personal relationship with Bob throughout the New Life. That's another nice place to start.
Thanks so much, Jamie. I think that's super helpful for a lot of people who want to dig in a little bit more, to have some references. And many of the people who are joining us for Zoom or maybe listening later on may also have read these books. But for those that haven't, that would be a great place to start. So
Yeah,
thank
and Lord Mayher too. If you have
you, of
the
course.
volumes of Lord Mayher, the 1949 to 52 period is excellent there.
Great. Jamie, you've been so helpful for all of us who want to know more about Baba's life in a historical perspective. So thank you so much for your time and your efforts.
It's a
And
great pleasure for me, and I appreciate it, and I appreciate it very much. I know you all don't know all the things that Susan does in the background, but she does this, and then she edits these things. When I say something stupid, she takes it out for me, and she does all kinds of good work back there. So we appreciate her very, very much. And we appreciate all of you coming. It would be no fun to just be talking to just me and Susan. Well, it's fun talking to me and Susan, but nice to have you guys here too. So thank
definitely.
you all.
And everybody, thank you so much. We really appreciate your being here. And whether you're listening to us live or whether you're listening to us later, Jai Baba, everyone. And please come and visit us here on the center. We would love to see you for the first time or for the nth time. So please come and join
Especially
us.
October 16th. It'll be the New Life coming up soon.
That's right. And please also join us every first Sunday, we're having a virtual discussion. For the second Sunday of every month, we're having virtual discourses, and every third Sunday is the virtual presentation on Mayor Baba's life and historical perspective. So just keep us in mind if you'd like to come again. And with that, we will end our presentation, and hopefully we can all say Jai Baba together for those that would like to.
Avatar Meher Baba ki jai.
Jai.
Avatar Meher
Avatar Meher
Baba
Baba
ki
ki
jai.
jai.
Avatar
Meher
Baba
Baba
ki
ki
jai.
jai.
Hey, Bob, everybody.
Jai
Thank you.